Hi, and welcome to Crash Course Cryptozoology. Cultures around the world have contributed their fair share to the world's folklore, but none are perhaps more intriguing than that of England. England, of course, being part of Europe, is wrought with stories of fairies, leprechauns, and the such like. Folklore is also a very interesting part of cryptozoology. Admittedly, a lot of cryptids in cryptozoology are also seen as folkloric figures, in fact, some mainly as folkloric figures, such as the bunyip. Of course, part of the aim of cryptozoology is to determine whether or not these animals are truly 100% folkloric or if there is some sort of foundation in reality. The scientific pursuit of this truth is the foundation of cryptozoology itself. One of the most prominent examples in cryptozoology of this folkloric phenomenon is the Owlman of Cornwall, England. Allegedly first sighted on the night of April 17, 1976, the Owlman of Cornwall was described as a humanoid, bird-like animal, most resembling an owl, but 7 feet tall, standing erect, with a huge wingspan, glowing red eyes, and a notorious, quote-unquote, wide mouth. Certainly an odd animal to describe. And of course, like any cryptid, the Owlman is surrounded by controversy, one of the main controversies being around Tony Shiels. Tony Shiels was the man who recorded most of these sightings. Strangely enough, most if not all of these eyewitnesses never seemed to go to any other researchers. Of course, this could be fear of ridicule or some other mockery, but it has also been alleged that Tony Shiels had been known for hoaxing. However, in terms of this video, that is neither here nor there. Instead, this video will take an angle at the Owlman that not many have taken before. The Owlman will now be examined through the lens of speculative biology. In short, speculative biology can be defined as the hypothetical application of known biological rules, laws, and boundaries to an alleged animal in order to determine the credibility of that alleged species according to the laws of nature. Because of the rather scientific and species-oriented nature of speculative biology, instead of calling the subject the Owlman, in this video, the species will be referred to as the church owl, due to the fact that many of the sightings took place around Old Monnan Church. First occurring in 1976, church owl sightings persisted up until the late 90s, but grew less numerous over time. However, there are still occasionally reports of strange, bird-like sounds coming from the forest around Cornwall, England, that aren't belonging to any recognized species. There exists no photographic or physical evidence for the church owls, only anecdotal evidence and eyewitness sketches. However, eyewitness sketches do provide an interesting look into the consistencies in sightings. As previously stated, the church owl has been described as standing bipedally and clocking in at around 7 feet tall when it does so. Its most notable features are its red eyes, its large ear-like appendages, its wide mouth and beak, some sort of strange appendages at the ends of its wingspan, strangely long legs, and often black feet. The witnesses of the church owl were often young, and so it could be that we're looking at several different interpretations of what was being seen. Younger minds tend to be a bit more fantastical, after all. However, it is undeniable that there are these consistencies between these eyewitness sketches. Therefore, it could be said that there are definitely some confirmed features of the church owl, physiologically speaking. Most witnesses also describe the church owl as being dark grayish or brownish in color, a pattern usually labeled as mottled in the animal kingdom. And of course, all witnesses were terrified by the hissing sound the church owl occasionally made. That is the sound of a common barn owl. Barn owls can be found on nearly all continents, and they have several subspecies attributed to them. In fact, they are not only the most common owl in the world, they are one of the most common bird species in the world. Of course, the barn owl spends its time much like other owls do, but life is not for the starving. Owls need to eat too. The barn owl itself eats about 4 ounces of food every day to survive. Other than its striking eyes, wide mouth, and hissing sounds, this barn owl also shares something else with the church owl, the need to eat. However, the church owl being a larger species would need to eat far more than a common barn owl. Going off of a height of between 5 to 7 feet tall, the church owl would need to eat approximately 1 pound of food a day to survive, 4 times that of the common barn owl. The question then becomes, does England have a population of food that could easily support a population of church owls? As it turns out, this could be quite easy. Across England, there is currently, and has been for many years now, an epidemic of the grey squirrel population. They have nearly replaced the red squirrel, which was previously the country's dominant squirrel. While this might be bad news for red squirrels, for church owls, this is a fantastic time to be alive. One grey squirrel weighs about 1 pound. If a church owl could simply catch one squirrel each day, it wouldn't have that much trouble surviving, especially in an area like Monaghan, where the grey squirrel population is actually quite dense. However, like all things in nature, there are still limitations. Monaghan is many things: historical, beautiful, religious, but it's also small. The areas in which church owl sightings have taken place point to the idea that if there is such thing as the church owl population, it would need to be very small in number. This may suggest that instead of a full-fledged species that has come down the evolutionary chain, we may even be examining a single mutation in a set of individuals. Whether or not it's existed for millions of years does not change the fact, however, that the church owls would still need a good home to roost in. Of course, roosting in trees for these huge animals doesn't seem exactly like it would be entirely practical, especially because they tend to be so elusive. Rather, much like other large species of owls, the church owl would likely find its home in coastal cliff faces and denser areas of forest, something Monaghan would easily provide. Even with these befitting homes to live in, the population would need to be quite small. So small, in fact, that if the mutation theory is correct, it's likely that the church owls would not be able to sufficiently reproduce to carry on their species. When examining how well a species could potentially survive, there is a rule in science often cited as the 50 to 500 rule. This is considered the lowest possible population density for most animals to be able to reproduce efficiently. All evidence thus far points to everything working against the church owl's favor to reproduce. That is, unless the church owl is one of those rare exceptions to the 50 to 500 rule, which could very well be the case, as it is for some other large animals. Some species are able to survive off of even 30 to 25 individuals. If this is the case for the church owl, it would not only explain its elusiveness, but its ability to survive even though it is exceedingly elusive in a small area. If this were to be the case, and we had, hypothetically, about only 30 individuals in the church owl population at one time, it would really be to the species' benefit. They would only take out about 16,500 squirrels every year. It may seem like a large number, but for a species that is so numerous as the gray squirrel is, it's really nothing. The food of the church owl would be able to maintain itself and thus be able to sustain the few individuals left in the church owl population. Ultimately, the area of Monaghan and coastal England itself provides an interesting habitat for the church owl. It has a big enough food source, it has befitting homes, and given that the church owl population would be an exception to the 50 to 500 rule, it could sustain itself through reproduction, even though historically this doesn't exactly hold up, due to the less numerous sightings throughout the decades. Dead or not, if Tony Shields was not lying to us, the church owl may well have been a species people were seeing in the 70s to the 90s, and may still be hearing in the 2000s. Still most interesting about the case, perhaps, is the eyewitness sketches. The commonalities are interesting in the sense that, when translated through the lens of speculative biology, as we have done thus far, the features begin to make sense. The wide ears and mouth are actually traits that owls have. Specifically, these can be found in eagle owls, which are common in Europe. Red eyes are a common color with an owl's eye shine. Hands or claws at the end of the wings might not be appendages at all, but rather black-tipped feathers. Some bird species, after all, like turkey vultures, do tend to have very splayed, almost appendage-looking feathers at the end of their wingspan. The church owl's long legs may be an adaptation to walking erect. And the black feet, which look perhaps to some like tap dancing shoes, are perhaps rather large talons, something that just about all owls have. Perhaps it would be interesting to speculate what one might be seeing if one were to see a church owl. Perhaps it would look something like this. That being said, until next time.